All right, welcome everybody to this session of Life.Examined online. We are a philosophical group who get together and talk philosophy, and our aim is to help people improve their philosophical ethos. And philosophical ethos is just the philosophical sort of background, the wide worldview that helps us in or leads to how we make decisions in the world and think about the world. So that's what we're about. We have for a long time done live events. At the moment, we are obviously doing things online because of coronavirus, so that's where we are at the moment. And that's who we are. I'm Joshua Bronson, and I'm based in Gothenburg, Sweden.
And my name is Miriam. I'm also in Gothenburg, Sweden, and I'm wearing these humongous headphones that I normally just wear at the gym. It's part of my coming to terms with doing things online. Yeah. But what we want to do today is we have one of us will bring a topic, and today it's Matt, and Josh and I, we don't know what it's about. We've had a sneak peek, and Josh had some interesting ideas about what it could be prompted by. We'll see if he's right. So Matt is bringing the topic, and he will throw it into the floor, and Josh and I will help decipher what's going on. We'll ask open-ended questions like Socrates. We'll play Socrates and say, are you sure that's what you meant? This doesn't sound like consistent with what you said before. Things like that, to help each other think, so that we'll weave together a picture of what's going on. Yes. Yeah. All right. Matt.
Thank you, Miriam. My name is Nowachek, and I am sitting here in Lund, Sweden. And I am responsible for bringing the topic today. The broad topic for today is going to be on the issue of value. Now, I'd like to start out with a really concrete story and then raise two kind of broad questions about value. So the story is something like this. This happened exactly 1 week ago. I went to an outdoor swimming pool with my kids and my wife and to have fun and swim for the day. And I came in with my two boys into the sauna because they were getting cold. We wanted to go take a sauna. And there was a man there sitting there by himself. And we came in and he looked at us and he got a little upset because we had our swimming suits on. He said, "No swimming suits in the sauna. You can't have swimming suits in here. It's bad with the chlorine gas and everything, so no swimming suits." So I was like, okay, hey, no problem. So the three of us walked out. We put our swimming suits, hung them up on the rack, and they put theirs on the floor. And we came back inside and sat down. Well, a couple minutes later, another man comes in with his swimming suit on. And the man gets really angry at this guy. And this guy didn't respond in the way that the first man wanted. He didn't take his swimming suit off. And so the two of these guys started to have this incredible verbal argument here going on. And after a few minutes, the first man got so angry that he stormed out of the sauna. And in his frustration, in his haste, he grabbed everything that was hanging on the rack and left. Now, even my swimming suit, which was hanging there, okay?
Nice.
Now, this would have been really funny if it had not been the case that earlier in the day, in order that I wouldn't lose my wedding ring, I had taken my wedding ring off and I had actually tied it into the back pocket of my swimming trunks. Right. And so this man takes the swimming trunks and everything hanging there and he takes off. Now, I had only a couple seconds here to get my son to run out and get a towel for me so I didn't have to run out of the sauna into this swimming area completely naked. He got me a towel. I ran out and the man was gone. Wow. Now, I didn't care about the trunks, but I was extremely upset that my ring was gone, my wedding ring. So I went to the police immediately after this and made a report. And for me, the day was absolutely ruined. I was so disappointed and upset. My wedding ring was gone. Now, this raises two questions for me, this story. The first question is this. I was upset in large part because I had something of extreme value taken from me. Perhaps, I said to my wife, even the most valuable thing I own. Now, we might call this sentimental value, like the police did when I went and made the police report. But what does this really mean? What's going on here with respect to value, and what does this say about value in general? How should we understand value here? So that's the first question. That has to do more with the ontological question. The second question now is more of the moral question. The moral question is this: ought I have to had that strong emotional response that I did? And now I'm thinking here of the Stoic Epictetus, and he has a quote that I want to read from his handbook, the first paragraph of his handbook. He says this: "Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. Our opinions are up to us, and our impulses, desires, aversions, in short, whatever is our own doing. Our bodies are not up to us, nor are our possessions, our reputations, or our public offices, or, that is, whatever is not our own doing." So for Epictetus here, the most important thing is virtue and our moral characters. Those are things we can control. We can't control our possessions and whether they get stolen or not. So for Epictetus, this would probably be an issue that I have misplaced value. I put value onto a thing, onto a ring, and I've not put value in the proper place on the virtues and my moral character. So the second question, the moral question here, has to do with this: am I misplacing my value in response to this situation? Is that immoral or improper? My response to the loss of my ring, the theft of my ring. So those are the two questions: the ontological question about value, what is value, how does it work, what are we looking at, what are we talking about? The second question is it proper to have that kind of value, to hold that kind of value and that kind of emotional response? So I'm going to throw all that back to you guys and let you run away with it and see what you can do.
Nice. That's you just said, because when we talked beforehand, to clue everybody in, all Matt said was, "I've got a story about a theft." So they're like, you don't know what kind of theft it was. That's a fascinating situation. Yeah. So you've parsed it out into two different questions about value. One is what is value itself? So I guess are you suggesting, like, in what way can the ring bear value? Is that one question you've got?
Yeah, I guess that's part of it. I mean, what struck me was when I went to the police. The police were talking about. I mentioned the shorts, and I said those don't matter at all for me.
Right.
But the ring, I said to the police, is incredibly important. And the police said, yeah, of course, it's sentimental value.
Right.
And I think everybody would in our world would understand what that means. Yeah. Or when we say sentimental value, or at least we understand the words. But what is it exactly that we're talking about when we talk about sentimental value?
So, but is there? So I'm just trying. So if we're thinking about, like, the ontological question about what kinds. So here, this is what I'm thinking: is what kinds of things can bear value or have value attached to them? I mean, that seems like an ontological question, right? It's a question about what kinds of things there are. Are there things which? Well, maybe there's two questions there. Can a thing, anything, have value attached to it in some way? Sort of like, that's kind of maybe what we mean by sentimental value, that you attach a value to an object which is not inherent in the object. So
yeah, like a subjective placement of value onto something.
It means something to me because it has a certain history with me and so on, right? So I have a certain attachment to it. But it's not something which the thing itself has. Whereas then the second option would be that a thing would have some sort of inherent value. So you might think I can imagine the police maybe asked you this question, maybe they did, let me know. Did they say something like, well, what's the value of the ring? Like, how much is it worth? And then, well, it might be worth a lot to you, but we're going to separate those two things out, right?
Exactly. Well, I mean, they did ask that question, and I had a really hard time answering that because if I just think, okay, based on societal standards and values, the material value of the gold and the diamonds in it, maybe it was 10,000 crowns or $1,000 approximately. But on the other hand, I was also pulled to say I can't give you a value. It's irreplaceable. It's my wedding ring.
But
it's a unique event item that connects to a unique event that I can't replace.
Sure. Isn't that interesting that there's this, because the value, the market value. So one question is market value, and that is how much is the gold, how much is the ring worth on the market, right? How much are people willing to pay for it? But that is actually equivalent to sentimental value because it's a projection of worth, perhaps, unless you talk about something like instrumental value. So something might have a certain instrumental value for a larger project, right? So let's say you're trying to construct a building, and you say, well, we need let's say a bike, to make it like a simple mechanical thing, right? And you say, well, we need the crankshaft, the part that drives the chain, right? And there's a certain value that you place on it because it's you need it in order to make the whole function. So it has a certain value in terms of its utility. And that maybe is connected to market value, but not necessarily all along, right? But market value is also a kind of attachment to an object according to how much people are willing to pay, which is very similar to sentimental. It's just wider, just like a wider sentimental value.
Which comes, I mean, you're exactly right, which comes out of this sort of social agreement. I mean, I didn't think about this beforehand, but the quote just came to me from Heraclitus. He talks about donkeys prefer hay to gold, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but donkeys prefer hay to gold. And his point is, gold is not valuable to donkeys, to animals. It's a strange social construction that we place on this material as metal.
But that's interesting. I mean, Miriam, we haven't let you talk yet. Jump in.
I've been taking notes.
Okay. I mean, because in some ways, like, I can see, I guess I feel like I wouldn't want to go so far as to say that market value is something like a pure social construction.
No.
Right? Because something like gold maybe, or other kinds of valuable things, like rare earth materials and so on, they have, I mean, the instrumental value does play a role. So there's a kind of intrinsic nature of something like gold, or which is highly conductive, right? Which has all kinds of properties which are very useful, which in turn makes it something which is valuable, right? So there is social construction aspects perhaps, and then there are also intrinsic aspects that contribute to the overall, you could say, value of some item or some material good.
Yeah. And maybe that gets clearer when you start talking about things like fresh and clean water, for example.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Like we're not just talking about a social agreement. I mean, that is a valuable thing because it leads to the ability to live.
where at the same time, like a signed baseball by some famous person carries a certain kind of value, which in some ways you might think is purely socially constructed. It has a certain historical, I don't know, whatever, and people put value on it in some particular way, and so then it can be valuable in some sense, but that's maybe purely social construction, whereas maybe something like raw materials have some intrinsic, I mean, it gets complicated because it gets all woven up into what we want to do with it, right? I mean, like, we want to build certain things, we have certain,
interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, but you're getting, this is, Miriam, go ahead and jump in here.
Yeah, so I was thinking about a few things, and one is the intrinsic value versus the extrinsic value that we have put on things, and that might change over time or in different societies. But the intrinsic value comes when something is rare and like completely unique, like a person. So the valuable thing we have is this unique one person. That's why it's so you can't kill. So this is the most the thing with the most intrinsic value, the completely unique. And hay, there's a lot of hay, and also it has a very short lifespan, so it just it comes more and more, comes all the time. So that was that. So that is the unique person is irreplaceable, like we were saying before. But then I was thinking so it was the idea that you shouldn't have put so much value to this thing. Instead, you should have put value on virtue and moral character. But this ring for you is a symbol of virtue and moral character, and it's like it's inbuilt in this your wedding ring. Because I mean, a wedding ring can be a symbol of many things, and there are many kinds of marriages, some of which are not very virtuous or not very nice, and but for you this is a symbol of virtue and moral character, and like the person you want to be, like it's a symbol of all these things. So the important concept here, of course, is the symbol, and the
right.
symbol, the narrative, the interpretation. And then I wanted to say about the sentimental value, because we sentimental, though just the word sounds like it's only sentimental.
Yeah.
You know, it's not nothing real. You'll forget it soon. You know, don't. But sentiment means it has a lot to do with meaning and the senses, and like a combination of these, like a hermeneutic meaning-seeking aspect of sensing something. So it's a really big word. I mean, sentimental value is nothing to just shake off.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's very often sort of thrown away as exactly what you're saying. It's less important. But maybe what you're saying actually is that it's actually perhaps the most important thing, because it's directly tied to what it means to be human.
Yeah, but what it means to be the unique human that is you. That is irreplaceable, and you know, but of course it is a symbol, so there can be another symbol, because like in psychoanalytic theory, you will talk about the presentation versus representation. Okay. Yeah. So, for instance, a hysteric person. I just read this, that's why it's in my mind. But someone who suffers from hysteria will have something becomes a presentation of death and causes the same response instead of a representation of death, which causes a different response. Do you see the difference? So a symbol is a representation. It's not the actual thing. It doesn't hold your actual virtue and moral character and who you want to be in this world and your uniqueness.
Sure. That's a very good distinction. I think that
right.
Seems,
absolutely.
That seems quite right. So then the question becomes, if I can extend your question, Matt, is, well, okay, so the ring. Is representational, and there's a value that there are other values that are in a way deeper, obviously, that are more important, but they are attached or applied. I want to come back to attached because I don't know what that means, but they're applied in some way to this object, but they aren't in that object itself per se. Yeah, they aren't.
I didn't lose my marriage a week ago.
Yeah.
That's right.
My marriage was not. Yeah, the virtuous nature of the marriage was not lost in any sense when I lost the ring.
Absolutely.
And you as a husband isn't lost.
No. Yeah, absolutely. But so then it seems like there's two questions. I think like one is, I mean, because the ring isn't only something that you valued, right? A ring also has there's a social aspect of it in terms of like people recognize what it is within the culture. It has a social language and narrative and all that kind of stuff. So that's one question is, are there certain kinds of things that are of a certain nature that they can have value attached to them, or does it make no difference what the thing is for whether or not we can attach value to it?
Right,
and then the second question is, what are we talking about when we say that value is attributed or attached or associated with, right? Because that seems also very, very, I'm not sure what to think about it, right? I mean, you know, a wedding ring, like there's value, we attach value to it, but in what sense is value attached to it? Because just like you said, Matt, like your marriage is not the ring, right? Or whatever the thing is. Like there's all kinds of ways that we do this all the time, and
right.
I'm just not sure what's happening there. Like what's happening with attachment.
I mean, I wonder if it's a good parallel to draw to the world of artwork and the art world, because there's a lot of art objects that maybe have the same sort of dynamic going on. There's a certain value of art pieces that are there because we can tell a certain story. There's a certain narrative connected to it. So, for example, you can have somebody who's making a rip-off Jackson Pollock, who's throwing paints at a canvas all haphazard, and that can be absolutely worthless when it's shown to be a fake, because it lacks that story, the narrative connected to Jackson Pollock. And there's definitely a social part of that. I mean, the art community has a role to play in that, in the placement of value. The buyers, the people who are making the art. I mean, there's a complicated social dynamic there. I wonder if something similar is going on with this ring. Like you said, Josh, that there's a story, a narrative going on in my own life, in my wife's life, and our friends, the people who were there, and so on and so forth, that's connected to this ring. There's also a sense in which there's a social dynamic. If marriage or we could just say good relationships weren't important, then nobody would really care about the ring. But it was interesting when I was walking around talking to the staff, even to the police. Everybody instantly understood the seriousness of the situation when I explained it was my wedding ring. Yeah. Right. So there was a sense of, there was a social recognition of something there, right? So there's a history, there's a narrative, there's a social recognition, maybe similar to the art pieces in the art world. I don't know. Because
if I had said, I have just lost these blue headphones from Claes Olsson, and they are a symbol of my marriage and my I'm not married, but my virtues, who I want to be, and my moral character, and people would be like, right, you can I'm sure you can find another pair and put this attach the same value to them. Yeah.
But let's say you received those headphones as your partner was on his dying bed, and it was his last desire for you to have these headphones because they represented his love of music. Suddenly those absolutely worthless headphones that you could go buy another pair for 200, 300 crowns are suddenly incredibly valuable because they're connected to a story, but also to a larger social connection, which is the value of caring relationships, right? So, but isn't it not, because I think maybe you highlighted something there in the way you just described that, because maybe it's not just, there's a historicity of an object. There's the path of the object through time and where it is at certain times, right? So like those headphones, one of the reasons I'm assuming that they don't have much value other than the market value in a sense, right, is because sorry Miriam. they look great, Miriam. They look great. No, Thank you. Match your shirt even. I mean, wow. Exactly. But like, I mean, is that they are something which is which we have for a relatively short amount of time, right? I mean, they are a consumable product which you can buy for a certain amount, and then it only lasts for a certain amount of time, and then they go away, right? Whereas like the story you just told, like let's say somebody gave them to you on their deathbed, and like it's connected to a large story. Like the reason why then that set of headphones become important is not because of what they are, but it's because of where they were when that happened, right? So it's like it's like it's that they were there at that time, and then they can carry on even when no longer maybe they're out, they don't work anymore or whatever. They can still have that value because of they were connected to that moment. Yeah, I have another thing about value. So yeah, totally, and it so the narrative and the memory and the sentiment and the senses and the story that's part of this. Like I have, we did an episode on nostalgia that you can go find if you like. Good. And I was wearing, for that episode, I was wearing this jumper that I bought for my own money in 1994 when I was 15 years old. And I still have that, and I have a number of items like that. And I even had a pair of jeans that were so broken. They were more sort of like Ship of Theseus. They were more patches than original pants. Right. And I only threw them away like a couple of years ago because I had them for almost 20 years because they were so important. I wore them at so many parties in my 20s, and they were so important for my identity and everything. But my point here was the thing about value is that some people don't get it. They don't get your sense of value. And there is a kind of scale of interpersonal exchange of value. Like some things we have laws that say a human being is the most valuable thing because it doesn't come natural to everyone. And some people will say that this person is more valuable or this person is, and they will kill another, or like
a child, or like we have this we have rules and regulations about this, and these rules are not the same all over the world. So we can have different ideas about even like all value, I guess. We can have different, right? Like it's something that's deeply what's the word, like it's like the concept of value is universal, yet it's always separate or something like that. It's a conflict between the oneness and the separation. And do you see what I'm getting at?
Well,
there's a universal shared sense of value, but that takes different manifestations in different times and cultures.
It's like a shared sense of like everybody has something that they value. But it's different things, and if I talk about these pants or these clothes that I have that are so old, and people will say like, come on, seriously? But so like a completely not understanding.
And maybe there's been a lot of attempts to connect. I don't want to, I guess I got to be careful here. I don't want to make too much of this, but I think you guys are both onto something in connecting value to consciousness.
Sure.
And let's take a really extreme case. Ants and memory. Ants, for example, I don't think they can talk about value perhaps in the same way that human beings can. Maybe we can say through their behaviors they value certain things like sticks and certain kinds of stones and things like that to build a house and things like that. But I don't think we talk about value or valuing in the same way there. There's a sense it's connected to consciousness. And I think Josh and Miriam, you mentioned this as well. I think we're into the incredible importance of time for value. You mentioned the ship of Theseus, Miriam, this idea that we have a ship and then we replace plank by plank after a while, and in the end we have the same form of the ship, but it's completely different material components. Can we talk about that being the same ship? Well, in some sense we can, if people still agree that that's the same ship. Maybe value is something similar, that even if those headphones that we were talking about break down and you replace piece after piece, if you have a subjective relation to it that remains, that's connected to your consciousness and memory and this history, this narrative, then maybe the value still remains there. But for me, that seems to be extremely worrisome or problematic in some sense, that we're starting to divorce value from the concrete.
But isn't there? So if I remember, we did a. I can't remember what the context was when we did this, but we did some presentation, us at Life.Examined, where we had this a circle that tried to capture the different branches of philosophy and all the different parts. And in one, and I can put it up when we put the video together, is divided up into basically roughly 3 sections. One that has to do with epistemology, one that has to do with metaphysics, what kind of things, how can we know things, what kind of things exist, and what kind of things have value is one whole section, right? And so I'm just thinking that one way of thinking about this is to try to figure out what kind of value are we talking about, right? Because you can have something which is, one question is what kinds of things are good, so there's an ethical, moral value, but there's also like value in terms of the usefulness of something, like we've already mentioned just earlier, which isn't necessarily the same thing as moral, right? And then there are other kinds of values in terms of like mathematical values. So you might say that somebody is taller than, which is a certain value in terms of a scale or something like that. So and then there's artwork, there's aesthetics, what kind of thing has value in those terms. So there's these different kinds of value, and the most general question is a theory of value. What is value itself? But then there's more specific questions, and it's hard to say. I don't know. One question, I guess one way to problematize it, I think that would be good, is to think like this: you might go a number of different ways and think that there is a core single value which gives value to other things. So if you are somebody like a consequentialist, right, who wants to say that a kind of simple simple way of saying that it's pleasure and pain, and pleasure is valuable, pain is the negation of that, and so anything that contributes to pleasure for conscious creatures, perhaps, or something like that, is therefore valuable. So that gives value to everything else. So everything else only has value in so much as it contributes to that. But that's a very you might not want to go that way. You might want to say that there are various value camps which are not necessarily unified in one single value, right?
So if we could put some terms on this, I think you're talking about some value monism versus value pluralism. There's one single value that all things lead to, or there is a plurality of value.
And I don't know, and I mean, then you could have value monism or pluralism within different areas as well. So you might say something like, within ethics there is value pluralism, but in art there's value monism. Or, so you might have a more complex structure in that way as well. Right,
and I mean, I don't want to overstate here or overstep my knowledge here, but Epictetus, it seems like there is something of a value monism there. I mean, the most important thing is virtue. Yeah. And so then the rest of these things can be valuable, but only instrumentally insofar as they help us live a virtuous, good life. So in some sense, we can talk about the ring is valuable. There's nothing wrong with seeing it as valuable. But if that seeing it as valuable prevents me from living virtuously, well then I need to then be able to release it and let it go, dissociate myself from those harmful emotions that prevent me from being virtuous.
And I would go along with that, I think, pretty far. I mean, I don't know if I don't know if virtue itself would be a monistic structure. So I don't know if there's like a single, so you might, I mean, like eudaimonia, there might be a single virtue that all other virtues then get their value from. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I would tend to think that virtue for people is, like we've talked about before, right? That virtue is the thing which humans are made for. So to be virtuous is the greatest thing that we can achieve, and so material goods are valuable insofar as they lead to that. But then it becomes complicated to say exactly how they do that.
Right. And I think, I mean, to give. Oh, go ahead, Miriam. Go ahead.
I was just thinking about this one greatest value that gives value to other things. I love that idea, because then you can say that it's the human that makes the art piece valuable, and it's the human you that makes your ring or your wife. That these human beings make this ring valuable, and then you can say, okay, so it's not the human, it's like the divinity in the human. So you have this abstract aspect, and then you can. Then it seems like that is exactly what makes everything valuable. But if you have the divinity as the highest, I'm just like, trying to step up the ladder and seeing what's at the top. So if the divinity makes the ring valuable, then we also know that divinity makes everything else valuable. So you can again work with how the ring is a symbol, but there are also other symbols. Like, let's say now that you don't get your ring back. You can attach the same divine value, divine human value to another thing. I don't recommend headphones, though it will look weird.
Well, I mean, that gets us back into, in a way that jumps back to it might jump back into the Euthyphro problem, right? Where the question is whether or not something is moral or good because God says that it is, or does he say that it is because it's good? So that's a question of value, right? I mean, whether or not something has value intrinsically, or it's given that value from the outside, and how exactly that relation works. And so in a way, this is just a microcosm of that much larger question. Right. So the microcosm is how does that work between humans and the things that humans value? And then there's a question about, like you said, going further up the chain of being, right? I mean, there's a further question about how everything holds together and has value.
But this is so important because, I mean, when we talk about my ring, I think we're all in agreement that it seems like it's difficult to make the argument that has intrinsic value, strictly intrinsic value. But those questions suddenly become really important, Miriam, as you point out, when we start to talk about human beings. And the question is where we are then placing that value. Is it because of some image of God, imago Dei? Is it maybe because there's a rational component to the human being that makes the human being intrinsically valuable? Is it that humans are placed into caring relationships? I mean, there's all sorts of different accounts for how we try to get that. It seems we're all in agreement that at least that's something worth pursuing, that question of the intrinsic value of human beings. If we can't have a philosophy that can engage with those questions in a serious way, I think that's a very poor philosophy.
Well, so and actually that's quite interesting, right? Because depending upon how you break things down, one temptation is to put everything in terms of instrumentalism,
right?
But without a clear end that instrumentalism is going towards. So to say something is instrumentally valuable demands an account in Aristotelian terms of the telos. Right. It's instrumentally valuable for what? For X, and then that becomes a difficulty to explain.
Yes, and you might also fall in the trap of saying that only things that are good are valuable, because then you have, I'm thinking about, again, the idea that God is good. I'm always trying to climb the stairs here. But you can also have the thought that if God is like everything, then God has to be both good and not so good. And so our sense of goodness might also be slightly immature, or you see what I'm saying? So so when it comes to value, it's like a constant re-evaluation going on, where we have to check: is this valuable to me? How is it valuable, and why is it valuable?
That's interesting about like instrumental value, right? Because instrumental value isn't the same thing as moral value. So something could be instrumentally valuable and not be good. So for example, let's say you're a serial killer, just because serial killers are fun to think about. Let's say you're a serial killer, and you just happen to be a pretty incompetent serial killer. So you try killing people with a Lego block. And you're like, well, instrumentally, it's just not very good for the job. Now good there is just means instrumentally. It's not it doesn't have much value in killing people. That's irrespective of the question, right? It's irrespective of the question about whether or not killing people is a good thing. We want to say no, killing people is not a good thing morally. But you could ask the question, right? The question is appropriate to ask what device or what tool is good for the purpose of killing people, right? If you're a serial killer.
Crazy. Oh god.
Well, I mean, that's just to say that it's instrumental, right? It completely depends on how you. It's a hypothetical argument. So if you want to be good at if you want to be a good pianist, you need to practice playing piano. It's instrumental to the end. If you want to be an effective serial killer, then you need to have tools that are good for the job, right? I mean, that's
And the side note of that is that you can have a knife is good if it's sharp, and that's irrespective of how you use it.
Yes, good, right, and that's another.
Well, I mean, actually, that's not quite right. That's not quite right. If you're using it, the function to cut things, well, then of course a good knife is a sharp knife. But it seem strange to talk about a knife that isn't sharp being good at all. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Unless you wanted to use it unless you had you wanted to use it to hammer in.
Right, and then it wouldn't be a good knife; it'd be a bad hammer.
Yeah, it would be a bad hammer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, but that's interesting, right? Because there we're talking about value, but it's an instrumental value, respective to an end which might or might not be good in terms of its moral character.
Right.
Oh goodness. Sorry, technical difficulties here.
Well, we've covered a lot of good ground. I mean, I think we can start pushing us towards wrapping it up a little bit here. If I can just quickly summarize what we talked about, the story about the theft of the ring, and then the two questions came up. The first, the ontological question talking about value, what makes the ring valuable, how do we understand value in general. But then the second question, the moral question, is whether it was morally proper of me to have this emotional response or attachment the placement of this value onto this ring in the situation that I had.
We didn't even get to the second question.
Yeah.
'Cause
Not
we didn't
really,
talk.
not really.
We didn't talk about your response.
No.
Right? We didn't really talk about that. So maybe that's for another time.
Maybe that's for another time. Yeah. Do you guys have any concluding thoughts you'd like to throw in here? I'll take the last one.
Yeah. Yeah. Go for it, man.
I think my takeaway is I'm getting interested now. I want to think about what's valuable to me, and I think my response will have something to do with what they are symbols of. Yeah, the symbol and the hermeneutic aspect. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean? Yeah. I'll have those to go with.
Yeah, I am left still unsure about attribution of value. Like I still
Right.
I'm completely like it's like one of those kind of questions like Augustine says, like everybody knows what time is until you ask them, and then they have no idea what it is. Right? And it's like that.
Right.
Like everybody knows what it is to say, oh, I value this. I think this is valuable. We all do it all the time. We use that language. We know what we're talking about. But then when you ask, what is it to attribute value to something? What's happening when we attribute value to something? Can you just attribute value to anything? I don't know. I don't understand. I can understand what the attribution of color is. I can understand maybe what the attribution of certain other kinds of things like logical consistency might be or something like that. But I don't understand what the attribution of value is. So I'm confused. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah.
No,
we don't understand it, yet it seems to guide our entire existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's crazy. That's incredibly exciting and frustrating at the same time. Something that is so incredibly important and central to us that is so unclear or not not very well developed. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and maybe that's just me, right? I mean, maybe it's just that I just have not read enough in the value theory about how that works, and maybe somebody's got a really great account of it, and I'd like to see that.
They should call us.
Yeah, let us
and
know.
tell us about it.
Come on the program.
YouTube.
Come on the show.
Well, I can wrap up too by I can leave us a little bit more with Epictetus with the moral question here. Yeah. I'll end my thoughts with that. After the ring was stolen, there was an incredible temptation for me in my thoughts to go incredibly negative about this person.
Yeah, right.
To tell a whole story about how rotten and immoral and rude and just utterly terrible this person was. And that's what really got me thinking about Epictetus. And actually, I think there's something to Epictetus here, is that I don't have any control over his actions, what he did with my ring or my shorts. But what I can do is I can at least control myself in the way that I relate to him. And I can still choose not to allow his actions to push me in a direction of being immoral, being the person sitting here thinking, what a jerk, I hate this guy, right? To try and at least hold some moral high ground there. And I think that's a good challenge from Epictetus, and that was one that I definitely wrestled with in the last couple of days. Let me end this, though, by saying this. 2 days after this happened, I went back to this same place to do a little police stakeout work. And sure enough, the same guy ended up coming back. And I went up and talked to him and met him and confronted him about this. And as it turns out, he was coming back to this place in order to return my shorts. Now, in his anger, he admitted this. In his frustration and his anger, he just took everything that was hanging up. But according to him, he didn't actually mean to take the shorts. And he had the shorts with him, bringing them back, and there they were. He put them in my hands. I reached down in the pocket and pulled out. Sure enough, there was my wedding ring.
Nice.
So in the end, everything came back, which also reinforced my thoughts here with Epictetus, is that it's important that we don't run away with our negative thoughts. Don't let them run over us and take over our lives, because we never know how the story is going to end up. And in the end, it could have all just been a crazy misunderstanding. And was it really worth me having 2 horrible days? Maybe not. but also maybe those days say something important about value, about the value of the ring,
Yeah.
about the value of my life, about things that I value in my life in general. So I don't know. I mean, I'll leave that also with a question mark there.
That's a great way to end it.
I'll put it there as well. Great session, you guys.
And I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just remember that when you said it was about theft and value, Josh's comment was, "Did you accidentally steal a car?"
That's another good question. Can you accidentally commit theft?
Well, it seems like this guy accidentally stole your ring, right?
Yeah,
Indeed. Well, thank you everybody for watching this. All of our viewers, we appreciate that you come and you still watch our Life.Examined discussions here, and hopefully there'll be a lot more in the future. Thank you everyone for joining us here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next time.